Hi, it's Monica Simons, and I'm excited to share with you your Advanced Academic Studies portion of your PLN. We're going to be reaching for new heights and moving from good to growth. If you are interested in this presentation, the slideshow can be found at the bit.ly at the bottom of the screen, and this slide will be at the very end as well. Today we have several learning outcomes. We're going to be framing our current philosophy on equity in the district. We're going to be looking at best practices in identifying students who come from culturally, linguistically, and economically diverse backgrounds for gifted services, looking at how we identify and comparing and contrasting, and then looking at some new processes that we're going to be using. You'll be able to assess and determine your campus needs, and then you'll be able to review the FAQ and resources. When we're looking at RISD currently, I love thinking about Felix Frankfurter's quote. He is a U.S. Supreme Court Justice, and he said, "There's nothing so unequal as the equal treatment of unequals." And I think that RISD is taking a bold step forward in doing things like providing dinner and college prep opportunities and even after-school activities and student clubs, because all means all, and we have to remove the hurdles from students and their ability to learn. And we know that students can learn when their instructional needs are met. The same issues make it very difficult to appropriately identify culturally, linguistically, and economically diverse students for needed gifted services, and yet it is required in Section 1 of the Texas State Plan for the Education of Gifted and Talented Students. So I drew some resources from Removing the Mask 3rd edition. It was originally written by Ruby Payne and the late Paul Slocum. Recently, a 3rd edition has come out, and Dr. Ellen Williams has collaborated with Ruby Payne to create this updated guide on equitable practices in gifted. So some of the key points we need to keep in mind are that we cannot treat all of our students the same. The method of identification has to be different. The curriculum, both in gifted services and out, need to develop and nurture strengths. We have to recognize language structure. Even though it's casual and concrete, that does not mean that it's of inferior ability. And that we use that lack of opportunity to learn that they have to gauge whether or not their standardized test scores are valid. We have to consider potential and not just standardized test scores. And the differentiated curriculum within gifted services needs to be provided by a specialist to bridge gaps in experiences. Their affective needs must be addressed so that they can be successful. And we all know that educators are on the front line of seeing beyond the mask of poverty. What do we currently do in RISD? Well, the first thing we have to recognize is that we have to move from cutoff scores to preponderance of evidence, from questioning admittance to providing support, from relying on quantitative measures to relying on qualitative measures, recommendations to perceptions, nominations, in fact, we should not use that term at all, to whole class screening, from equality to equity, and from reliance on schoolwork to considerations of those very environmental factors I mentioned earlier. You all are aware that we currently have a talent pool process in RISD. So we know that we have an opportunity to observe students over a longer period of time. But there are some challenges with that may not meet up with best practices. We do have a universal screening for all of first grade, but there is somewhat of a cut line still employed. And that leads to a disproportionate number of students in Quest from non-Title I schools. And Quest was actually designed for students with language barriers for a variety of reasons. All students receive identical lessons and they create identical products for their portfolios. They're also evaluated on the same instrument. Now, we have employed some of the better practices utilizing something called planned experiences. And so you can see here we try to build that preponderance of evidence with a whole child profile. And although they are observed, it is not in the general education setting. But we do employ the interviews of the teacher, the student, and the parent. But even these changes are only like patches on our current system, and eventually that highlights a need for a reset. Because, in short, our practices are not successful. You see, our current enhanced identification practices were limited to mainly our talent pool and in second grade. The lack of gains in our gifted identification is not indicative of poor practices, but instead things like gains being offset by demographic changes and Quest yielding lower than anticipated results because of a variety of factors, because we need earlier identification before second grade to overcome that opportunity gap. We do have fewer, but we have continued identification of students with opportunities to learn. We have a limited capacity and resources for formal Quest. The lesson experiences are standardized, and there is a need for observation in and connection to general education learning outcomes. We also know that we have attrition in grades 4 through 6 because students do not feel that they have the skills to be successful. And we have a lack of identification in secondary services. That is where that opportunity gap shows that they are not translating into performance in school, even though they may have had some skills and some abilities. They remained raw. So what are we going to do about it? I'm sure you're wondering that very question. What are we going to do to help overcome the situation that plagues most districts? Well, I am very excited to share with you our expanded and enhanced Quest, if you will, which we will refer to as enhanced identification processes moving forward. Let's look at some of the offerings. The expanded portion means we will have pre-K watch lists. In fact, watch lists at any time. We will have planned experiences at any time it is warranted by a placement committee in grades K through 2 or 3. Second or third grade depends on the service model out of school and the current needs. Planned experiences for transfer students who may have received gifted services in their former district or state, but do not meet the standard in Richardson to qualify for services. And we can provide targeted professional learning opportunities. We're going to enhance what we do by providing observation in the general education setting, connecting opportunities to demonstrate ability to current learning in the general education setting, continuing with the interviews with parent, teacher, and student, but employing flexible pacing, grouping, and a timeline, meaning students won't have a deadline by which they need to demonstrate their abilities. And during this time, no new referral would be needed from a parent until after that placement. We will also have quarterly updates shared with parents during the report card window. Now, for students who are qualified for services, we will bridge that identification by scaffolding services for students who need it. You see, through identification, we know they have a toolbox, but it's our job to ensure they have the tools and they know how to use them. Bridge will include bridging experiences for the students who have been identified, flexible entry times, and flexible transition times out of Bridge, at which time they would move to a more traditional gifted curriculum. Now, what does that mean for you? Well, we all know teamwork makes the dream work, so we have a little homework for you. Please visit the FAQ located here. Complete the Google form here. These questions will help you reflect on your campus, and the responses will serve as a pre-assessment as we plan to help on how to support you next year. Please help us by getting to reference Reach as gifted services and all identification processes like Quest as enhanced identification to alleviate confusion. And call me or Jasmine at any time with questions or concerns. Here's the slide that I promised you. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to working with you as we move into the future to go from good to growth.